And we are thrilled to feature at least two of our three guests today. That would be Aaron Ockerman. He is the ED for the Ohio Association of Election Officials. Lisa Welch, who is the president of the Ohio Association of Election Officials. She's also the director for the Holmes County Board of Elections. And then hopefully we will be seeing Brian Sleeth here shortly. He is the first vice president of the OAEO, as well as the director of the Warren County Board of Elections. And today's forum will be moderated by Jen Miller, who is the executive director for the League of Ohio. And Jen has over 20 years experience working with diverse communities to promote social justice and civic action through her positions with the Columbus Recreation and Parks, Martin Luther King Jr. Arts Complex, and the Ohio State University. There goes my phone, sorry about that. And the Global Gallery. Jen earned her master's in arts policy, education, and administration. And she at the program of the John Glenn School of Public Affairs at Ohio State. She also holds a bachelor's degree in vocal music, in history and ethnic studies from Capital University. She is a graduate of the U.S. Department of Energy and REL Leadership Academy. She's a board member for the Ohio Debate Commission, the Ohio History Connection, and the Kids Voting Ohio. She's always inspiring others to participate in civic engagement. That is her deepest passion. And fun fact about Jen Miller, she's also a jazz singer and the proud mother of a beautiful, beautiful daughter. Jen, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's so nice to be with everyone today. We're still working on Brian Sleeth. Hopefully, maybe Alice can actually jump on the phone with him. But I'm going to introduce our other two guests first. No stranger to this crew is Aaron Ackerman, who is the executive director of the Ohio Association of Elections Officials. He's a graduate of the University of Dayton. He has been a legislative aide. He's worked for the Bureau of Workers' Comp. He's worked for other state house firms. He's been around the state house for decades. And then Lisa Welch, who is, as we mentioned, is the director of the Holmes County Board of Elections. She's been in various roles since 2004 there. She is the secretary of the Holmes County Republican Women, president of the Hilltop Garden Club, trustee of VFW there in her area, many, many different things. She's been a council member in her community, and she is on the staff relations, parish relations board of Lakeview United Methodist Church. I don't know what spare time Miss Lisa has. She's a very busy person, but we love having her. She's a great voice of wisdom when it comes to how elections operate. So I want to welcome you both, and we'll keep working on getting our friend Brian on the horn as well. So thank you both. Hope you are both doing well. The first thing, I think our folks know, but can we let's do two things. I'm going to tell both of you what your questions is. Yours, Aaron, is just what is the Ohio Association of Elections Officials itself and what's your role? And Lisa, after that, I want to have you jump in and talk about how the Ohio Association of Elections Officials makes decisions about various policies when maybe you're going to support a policy or oppose a policy. Okay. So.
Thanks, Jen. Well, thank you to you and Cynthia and Michael for having us today. We really appreciate it. We always appreciate the opportunity to talk to your members about what's going on in the state. We very much appreciated all the support that you have lent over the past 18 months, recruiting poll workers, keeping eyes on polling places, keeping us informed of issues, and making sure that we're aware of how we can best serve our voters. So we really appreciate that. The Ohio Association of Election Officials is a bipartisan nonprofit organization. Unlike the League, I will say we are not nonpartisan, we are bipartisan. We are made up of exactly equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats, and that bipartisan split holds true through all of our committees, our leadership team, right down straight through our membership. And so we really pride ourselves on arriving and working together to achieve bipartisan consensus on policies and questions that go before the voters. So that's kind of what we do. We're we kind of have three prongs that we really stick to. We pride ourselves on educating our members and the public about election issues. We work very hard on advocacy. And then we definitely want to make sure that we are educating our members through conferences and other opportunities to learn more from each other about how to promote best practices in the election industry. So I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Okay, we are divided by partisanly. We have an equal number of Democrats and an equal number of Republicans. That also goes for our committee. So our legislative committee, they are 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans currently that work together to go over possible legislation that has been proposed in the State House. Also to come up with things that we want to ask the legislators to provide for in current or upcoming legislation. And our legislative group then, after they hash over things, to actually decide if we're going to support the bill that's introduced, it goes to our trustees, and then our trustees, which is also made up of an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. We have board members from board offices, we have directors and deputy directors on there. So it's an equal number of deputy directors, and board members. It's an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. So I think right now it's 20 with 5, 5, 5, and 5. So it does, to get support, it has to make everyone satisfied. Now, we're not always happy with what we get, but we're all able to live with what we get. So we get some spirited discussions going.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's super interesting. It's like League in the sense that our members really determine our priorities. We do it through a convention structure, and they're kind of bigger. They're done on the convention floor. So larger kind of events, not as often, but I think it's really interesting to be kind of two membership driven organizations. Can we talk about how was 2021? How was that election? What have we learned from the primary in general of 2021? And then we'll jump into what we're thinking about for 2022.
Well, maybe I'll hop in kind of at the macro level, kind of with what I observed. And then certainly I know Lisa talks to a lot of her peers and has personal experiences. And I think we can't talk about 2021 without talking about 2022, because to your point, Jen, I think the lessons we learned are really going to inform what drives our association over the next year and what our priorities for 2022 are going to be. So at a very high level, I will say that this election was a very technically difficult election. There were lots of questions, lots of issues, lots of candidates. I mean, you just look in Hamilton County where they had like 30 some people running for city council and having to, come up with a ballot that accommodated that. And so just very technically difficult issues to kind of deal with and grapple with. And candidly, it was not the cleanest election I've ever seen. I think what you saw was pretty much the product of exhaustion after 18 months of really, well, more than 18 months, because predating COVID, we were challenged in many ways through security directives and other things that your members are probably aware of. You saw a lot of attrition as well, a lot of turnover. So you saw a lot of new directors and deputy directors and staff people, board members doing their very first election in a very challenging environment. So, well, I'd love to say, hey, this was easy peasy, no problem. I do think there were a lot of challenges in 2021. And I'll let Lisa maybe speak to some of the things she saw locally and some of the things that her peers have talked to her about.
One of the things that I've noticed this year compared to previous years, we've had more people calling into our office and asking questions. In previous years, people would, I think, just go to the polls and vote, and they didn't, one, try to get informed before they went. But now they're calling in and they're asking, hey, where do I find information on candidates that they, don't get the local newspaper maybe, and they're trying to find information specifically on an issue or a candidate. The other thing that we're noticing is they're questioning how things are done, where in the past they didn't pay attention to those things. So maybe with some of the questions that arose over the 2020 election, maybe they're more, trying to be more aware. But we also have a lot of people that were disinterested this election. We had our lowest turnout election for a special election, general election, I should say. But we had 19 issues on our ballot, other than trustees and village officers and school board members. And we only had 22% turnout. And that's the lowest I ever remember, other than a truly special election. So it's been very different for us to handle, to administer, and we're still dealing with COVID, and we didn't have the full workers that we thought we would have, because last year we were at 150%, and then we, a lot of them said, oh yeah, I'll do this again, but then when it came right down to it, we had enough full workers. We actually had a few extras that we had come in and help us with a few things in the office on the day before, but we were right down to the wire. I mean, we ended up losing a lot of those extra full workers. So I think that could be a problem in the future.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's go ahead, and we're going to talk 2022, but let's go ahead and talk turnout, because it was a light year for turnout. That was true across the state, right, Aaron? And I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on what's the number one thing we could do to improve voter turnout and voter participation.
I'm going to let Lisa go first on that one. I don't think
the best thing, I think, for turnout for the municipal elections would probably be that the absentee ballot request be mailed to everyone for the general election. I know it always is in the even-yeared elections, but I think a lot of people forget about the elections because it's not at the forefront of the news. And then by the time they get close enough to think about it, it's too late to request an absentee ballot.
Yeah, by the way, that's something that we support and have always supported. So another thing we agree on. Thank you. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I was going to say, in addition to that, I'll take the more pessimistic view and just say I really hope that the lack of turnout is not a direct result of the attacks that have been hurled at our democracy, not just in Ohio, but around the country. And, I think we're all concerned that as those attacks mount and people potentially lose trust in the institution, then they fail to exercise their right to vote. And so that would be unfortunate. I think probably too early to know or tell, but that's certainly in the back of my mind as I think about how we can continue to encourage people to get out and vote.
I think that's really helpful, and again, everyone knows that we just want folks to vote. We focus on just getting everyone the information needed. So, we often get asked about fraud or voter security, election security or integrity. I think our members would love to hear how you talk about that so that they have new ideas on how to talk to voters about these concerns.
Sure. I mean, we can probably run through high-level talking points, but I know Lisa, the Secretary of State in recent months has kind of sent out to all the boards of elections a voter education security toolkit that really kind of highlights for us some of the primary things that we should try to engage our voters on. So maybe Lisa, do you want to talk about that toolkit a little bit? And some of the things
sure. First off, everything that's done in a board of elections office is done by a bipartisan team. There's always a Democrat and always a Republican present. Everything we do, if one of us does it, the other is looking over our shoulder and then double checks it, because we need to make sure that it's done correctly. So when we're programming the ballot, both of us are present. When we're doing all the proofing, there are so many people that look at the ballot for the proofing. So, I mean, numerous people are looking at but both parties, whenever we test the machines, they're both there. When we keep the machines locked in a double locked room, it takes a key that the Republicans have and a key that the Democrats have to open that room to access that room. So every morning when we come in, one of the Republicans has to unlock their lock and one of the Democrats has to unlock their lock so we can even get into the room. And then it's the same at the end of the day, we both have to lock up so that then we know that nobody from the other party was in there unaided by a Republican. Your machines, they're always in the custody of a bipartisan team. Our machines are delivered by a team of a Republican and a Democrat. Those machines are never hooked to the internet. They have a USB stick that is removed to take the results. But of course, the ballot of record is the paper ballot that gets scanned into the scanner. So we have that. Our ballots, when they come back to our office on election night, they come back with the presiding judge, and then we call ours the assistant presiding judge or ride along. And I know the new terms are voting location manager, and then some counties have a different name for the ride along. But it's two people of two different parties bringing the ballots back. They come back together in the same car with those supplies, and they bring it into our office. And in our bipartisan team, we have people that check them in, and then we have somebody that goes through and verifies all that we need is there. So the forms that we need, that all the ballots are there, that the unused ballots are there, and then everything gets put where it belongs, so for storage. And then the thumb drives get scanned in by a Democrat and a Republican into our system to print out a result. So everything, the whole entire process is always a Democrat or Republican day. Then when we do our official canvass, we have a Democrat and Republican checking provisional ballots to make sure that they, first of all, we see if the person is registered in the statewide voter system. If they're not registered in our system, we gotta verify with another county, if they came from another county, if they didn't vote there, that they are registered there. And then it goes before the board to vote on those ballots. So a ballot just can't get flipped in, and everything has to balance. And I've done this for a long time, but I've never had as much trouble making sure that every single thing balanced, because the Secretary of State's office has broken things down to even further levels of what we report now. So, and if you get one thing in the wrong column, they're like, that's not right. And we'd had 3 ballots that were scanned during our official canvass that were additional absentees added in, and they accidentally got scanned as election day ballots. So we knew right there, when they said, "Oh, you're 3 off," we knew exactly what happened. So we just rescanned the ballots. It did get corrected. Didn't change the results at all. It just changed what category the ballot fell under. But it's another one of those checks to make sure everything matches. And it's amazing to me that people think that there's possibly fraud out there when we have so many paper trails and so many double checks.
Now, I would just add maybe a couple things to Lisa's list there. One I know is near and dear to your members' hearts, Jen, and that's post-election audits, which we've been doing for many, many years. 99.98%, just remember that number. That's our accuracy rate from 2020. Something we should all be proud of, and certainly something the league has been involved with for a long time. And then I mentioned earlier that we've been really working toward 2022 and 2024 for a long time. One of those things was our cybersecurity directive, which was issued by the Secretary of State, which every staff person around the state at a board of elections would tell you was a huge pain in the butt, but has probably paid pretty big dividends, as evidenced by some stuff going on in Lake County that we can talk about maybe later as well if folks are interested. But again, lots of checks and balances, as Lisa said, lots of work going in to hardening both cyber and physical defenses at boards of elections to make sure that fraud is eliminated to the greatest extent possible.
Thank you for that. Lisa, I do think maybe we're getting a little background noise from you. I don't know if your cell phone is close to your computer. Sometimes that'll do it, or maybe it's a computer fan or something, but it will just keep rolling, and that's show business, right? In the 21st century, we never know exactly how our sound is going to be in Zoom. Can we talk about Lake County? I've had several members kind of ask for an explanation as to what's happened there. I mean, the one thing I always think is interesting is when the Secretary of State leans in, Lisa is right that that's another check and balance into the system itself. So, but maybe you could kind of demystify what happened there in Lake County and what we might learn from that or take from that.
Yeah, and I'm happy to start, and Lisa certainly jump in. So obviously it's tough because there is literally an ongoing Attorney General and FBI investigation going on in Lake County. So we need to talk in terms of allegations, not in terms of convicted criminal activity. And so I want to be very clear about that as we kind of talk about what's going on in Lake County. The allegation is that an elected official in Lake County allowed an unknown person access to some computer equipment, and it looks like an attempt was made to break in to the Board of Elections data and try to basically upload or download some activity going on at the Board of Elections to try to prove fraud. Obviously, that again, if that allegation is true, that is highly criminal activity. I think the big takeaway is that because our networks are completely segregated from the counties, the attempt to break in through the county system was unsuccessful. It was detected. It's being investigated. No access was granted to any Board of Elections network that would have in any way altered, changed, or even given a glimpse as to what's going on in vote tallying or vote counting. So really, at the end of the day, although it's upsetting and disconcerting, it's a huge success story for boards of elections around the state when it comes to proving just how hardened our defenses are. So Lisa, you may have more information. That's at a high level, kind of what I know, and certainly we'll all be keeping our eyes open to see how that investigation pans out and what results from it.
I have not heard anything further than that information.
Oops, thank you for that. I think that's interesting. We've had a few other kind of engagements with the Secretary of State and boards of elections. Do you want to kind of comment on those or help us understand those? But I do appreciate what you're saying, Aaron, that itself is really interesting, right? That someone tried to do a bad thing. They were not able. Well, we think allegedly someone tried to do a bad thing and they were not able and they were caught. And so the news is really, it can look scary, but we can look at it in terms of a success story. There's been a few other times in recent months that the Secretary of State has kind of leaned in on some boards of elections. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So a few boards around the state have been placed on what's called administrative oversight. Is that what you're referring to, Jen? Yeah. So again, you mentioned, I think you put it in really eloquent terms. Administrative oversight, it really is a check and balance between our state and local system of election administration. And so people hear that, Franklin County Board of Elections has been put on administrative oversight, or I think it's the Benton County Board of Elections or the Summit County Board of Elections, and they think, my gosh, there must be some kind of big problem there. From time to time, obviously there are problems, but in some of the more recent instances, I think what you've seen is that the Secretary of State is making additional resources available to boards of elections to help them overcome deficiencies that have been identified. And so again, I wouldn't say this is a positive thing, but it's certainly, I think, not as negative as some people like to attribute it to. So for example, at Franklin County, there was an instance or an occurrence where, see, your cat is real interested in what's going on in Franklin County and their ability to quickly upload data to their electronic poll books to reflect who had voted early in person during the election. That is an issue that has kind of been prevalent there for at least a couple elections. So the Secretary of State, seeing that problem persisted, has placed them on administrative oversight, which means they will be really coached up on how to fix that problem. They'll have weekly meetings with the Secretary of State and their staff, potentially Secretary of State staff could be on site to assist. But again, it's really making additional resources available once weaknesses are identified to try to rectify those. Lisa, I know I don't think you've ever been put on administrative oversight, so you don't have any personal experience, but you may have thoughts as well.
I'm having trouble unmuting. We have never been put on administrative oversight, but I have seen several boards over the years have been, and most of the time it's just a way for that new staff. A lot of times it involves a new staff coming in, and it gives them an opportunity to learn from Secretary of State's office what the Secretary of State's office actually expects from them. So they're learning it the right way. They're not just getting thrown into a situation and left out there to fend for themselves. And I think it is a very much needed plan for those boards that have had issues in the past. And I don't think it doesn't hold the stigma that it used to. I know it used to be, oh, somebody got put on an administrative oversight. Now I think it's a welcome thing because the state's there, they can tell you what they want, and then we can both work together to get where we need to be. So I don't think it's a bad thing anymore.
So really, it's like a status that once that's established, it means that the Secretary of State can lean in more to work with that Board of Elections to improve their operations. So,
Yeah.
okay, that makes sense. So Franklin County voters or other counties, when they see that their Board of Elections has been put on administrative oversight, they should know that that's not just a status, that that's really an opportunity to iron things out before the next election cycle.
Correct. Yeah. The other thing I'm quick to point out is it's also not a wholesale taking over of the local Board of Elections by the Secretary of State, right? I think sometimes you hear about like school districts that are on oversight or whatever, and they've been taken over by the State Board of Education or whatnot. That's not the case here. I mean, all decisions really, continue to be local and bipartisan. It's just, again, a supplement and a collaboration between the state and local level to remedy specific problems. So definitely, if you're in Franklin County or one of the other counties, don't feel like your board is being taken over by our Secretary of State. That's certainly not it.
Okay. Well, how about let's talk about 2022. Obviously, we expect it to be a much bigger year. Of course, boards of elections and league members are always explaining the importance of every election, but we do see more turnout in the even years. So can we talk about what you're expecting in terms of turnout, what kinds of challenges you think you might arise, and how we might be able to assist you with that?
Well, one thing you can help us with, people don't understand how they get assigned their party. And we've tried over the years to remind voters, inform the voters that when you get your ballot in a primary election, that affiliation is going to stick with you for 2 years unless you voted another primary election and change it. So we have lots of people, especially after the 2020 election, saying, oh, I don't want to be affiliated with this party anymore, or I want to stick to the other party. And we tell them, you have to wait till that primary election is coming up in 2022, and then you select the party you want to be affiliated with, and that's going to stick with you then for 2 years. So help spread that news. A lot of people don't understand. They think they can just call in and say, hey, change my party. I don't want to be this party anymore. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you can't do that in Ohio. That's not how the law is set up.
Aaron, are there expectations for 2022 and how we can help?
Yeah, I think poll workers, we talked about, Lisa touched on that earlier. Certainly 2020 was a high watermark, something we'd love to replicate every time. But I think that for whatever reason, fortunately, COVID seemed to appeal to people's patriotism maybe. And so people were really willing to come out and volunteer and work the polls that year in particular. There was a huge effort by the Secretary of State and local boards and the league that paid huge dividends. As Lisa mentioned, that did not follow through necessarily or carry over into 2021. So certainly look to push in 2022 again to make sure we're fully staffed. I think there are definitely some challenges that we'll be facing. I mentioned a lot of them already, but just kind of maybe to be a little repetitive, it's going to be interesting to see how these attacks on our democracy continue to play out and the toll that they potentially have as people head into more high profile elections where people perceive rightly or wrongly that the stakes are higher, particularly statewide offices and some of our state legislative races and congressional districts. I think we're going to continue to have issues with attrition. And so we're going to have a lot of new members. So I would say to your membership, Jen, please, if you have a new director or deputy director or board member at your local board of elections, don't hesitate to reach out and introduce yourself, establish that relationship. Our folks it's an overwhelming job when you first step into it. They don't know what they don't know. They get as much good training as we can provide and the Secretary of State can provide, but your resources are invaluable to them. So don't be shy about offering them up and lending a helping hand. I can't emphasize enough how important that is to my folks. As I mentioned, kind of just the exhaustion factor of coming off of COVID and the security directive before that. And then a lot of counties had special congressional elections in August. So it has just been absolute nonstop for the better part of 2.5 years. And people are just really burnout and tired. So one of the things we're hoping for, honestly, at this point is just kind of that no big policy changes happen, that we can just kind of be left alone to get our heads down, our noses to the grindstone, and get through the next year without upsetting the apple cart. And so while there are certainly lots of changes we'd like to see and improvements we would like to see either legislatively or through directive or whatever, candidly, 2022 is not going to be the year to try to push out major changes into this already stretched and tired election system. We just need to really focus and grind and get through 2022. So hopefully that helps.
One thing I will just say, just a pitch to all of my members that are voter service chairs, we like to have you get in with your Board of Elections. We have a whole bunch of topics that we think would be good to discuss. Everything from, do you have a lot of polling locations changing, or are there certain places where you really need poll workers? All those kinds of things help us educate voters better. And those conversations often are fruitful where we learn new things about elections operations, and our elections officials and boards of election staff can learn maybe some things about voter experiences that they might not have heard. There's continue to get questions about poll observers, and I think the term poll observer can mean a lot of different things. So can you explain what it means to have observers inside the location and who qualifies for that and what they're allowed to do versus the kind of, we have poll monitors that are nonpartisan election protection outside. So that's a different thing. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Lisa, you want to talk about who is allowed to designate observers and the very defined and specific role they have in Ohio as opposed to maybe kind of what gets tossed around in the national narrative about what observers can or can't do, because it's a pretty well-defined term in Ohio.
In Ohio, we generally our observers in our county are appointed by our chairman of our party. So our party, I should say, the chairman of each party designates people who come in and be observers in our precinct, and they give us a list of what precincts they want to observe in. You can also have a group of 5 people can designate observers also. Traditionally, we don't see that as much, but we have seen it in the past once or twice. If you get, 5 candidates that are, on the ballot, they can name someone, for each polling place, and including the Board of Elections office. Our hot spot is the Board of Elections office generally. They usually come here during early voting and hang out. We've had them come during the period between the election night results being tabulated and the officials can vote. And then when we do any recounts or audits, they'll also be here. We like to have the company in the office, because our office is kind of small and it gets kind of quiet in here sometimes. So we actually like the observers. Now our poll workers, I don't think they quite know what to think of the whole situation, and having the observers out at the polling place. And they're basically there to do just that. Observe, watch what's going on, be aware of what, things are happening. And it's just, I think, for them, I think our poll workers tend to be nervous in general. So whenever we get an observer, that makes them just that more nervous. But we like to have them in our office, because then it's, somebody we can talk to while we're working. And we find out interesting things about where they're from and why they're there.
Yeah, I think observers are a great and important part of our process, because they provide transparency to political parties, to candidates, to groups of concerned individuals, all those folks that are able to nominate, to the media. Media is another class of individuals who can designate observers and get credentialed. I have a funny story. I was in Montgomery County in 2020 during the early voting, and there was a League of Women Voters observer there. She was just kind of standing, watching the Montgomery County people check people in and move them through the line to do the early voting process, which all over the state was very robust, as you know. And and she was super friendly, and the director introduced me to her, and they were on a first name basis. And I went up and asked her how she was doing and what she thought. And she said, this is like a machine. She said, I'm supposed to be here looking for problems. She said, I'm bored, because it's just going so well. And so, and obviously if she wasn't bored and things weren't going well, I'm sure she would have let the local league know, and there would have been calls made to try to fix those problems. But I think sometimes election officials get defensive because they think, oh, an observer's here to like be watching over me and doing bad things. But as Lisa said, and a lot of times it's just a very collegial, collaborative process. And certainly we want to be transparent with the public and our voters. And so that's a key part of it. But but for the most part, we've had a pretty good system. I know other states where it's a new phenomenon, or people are saying you need to observe, meaning go in and interfere. That doesn't happen in Ohio. We've got really good statutes to make sure that the role is well defined, and that the observer knows what they're allowed to do. The election officials know what they're allowed to do. And so it becomes much more collaborative than I think you saw in other states.
And I do want to encourage, we're almost out of time. I want to encourage our local leagues to make sure that you are understanding what security protocols the Board of Elections is doing, that maybe you attend the post-election audit, and so that you can demystify for voters in your community that you personally know the controls and the protections that are in place, and that there are nonpartisan folks like League kind of also watching the process. Go ahead, Lisa, and then we're gonna, if you want to, and then we gotta wrap up here shortly.
One of the things I was going to say about observers, it's also been a fantastic thing for us, because we've got poll workers in the situation. People going in to observe, and then after they're like, oh, those people work so hard, but I didn't realize that all of this was done. And I'm like, well, would you like to work next time? And we train them and get them involved in the process, then, so they're not just observing the next time, they're actually doing the process.
That's cool. That's great. So I heard you say that loud and clear that you are not wanting to see major changes before 2022. This is one of those things that sometimes, like, voter advocates and elections officials agree on a lot, right? Because you're operating the process, and when you can operate the process well, that's often very good for voters. Of course, my members want to see all kinds of changes now, like online absentee requests or whatever. Can you just talk about how and quickly, because we're almost done, but like how much the calendar matters to an elections official and to the boards of elections in general, all the different things you have to do. And so how the calendar matters, and like also the differences maybe in human resources, depending on the county, for addressing new changes.
So very succinctly, I will say that one very wise election official once told me that there are three things that make a good election: time, money, and people. You can always get more money. You can always get more people. You can never get more time. So in many ways, that is the most important asset that we have. Everything is driven by the calendar. Everything is framed out around that calendar. In sometimes instances, years in advance. We've been planning 2024 since the day after the 2020 election. And so it is absolutely imperative that we meet deadlines, follow deadlines, and have the resources to do that.
And one of the things that you don't think about so much is, okay, a judge is ruling on if a candidate can appear on the ballot and it's after the deadline. Everything gets held up. Everything is interconnected, interwoven in that calendar. So if one thing doesn't happen when it should, it pushes everything back. So it's really important for us to stick to that calendar because we have so many other things to do, and especially in a small office. I think half of Ohio counties are considered small counties, and in most of those offices, there are 2 to 4 full-time people working, and have a lot to do. And I don't know how we do it sometimes. I think we've done it, and we know what has to get done, and we just say, hey, we're going to do it. And I know last year we were working 75 hours a week for like the last 6 weeks, and it was just, I want to say it was unbearable, but we somehow survived it. But it is, everything is interwoven, and it's harder for some counties to handle things than others, when things change. If you have a large staff, you can usually, push it down on 1 or 2 people and it'll get done. But, when we're doing something, we're still doing everything else also. So it can be a burden.
And it is time, but because redistricting is so important, maybe Aaron, you could just tell us what happens when maps are done, which of course there could be courts that intervene here, but let's just say we're got through all of those processes. You've got the new state house, state senate, and congressional maps. What do boards of elections have to do?
We have to take all that census data and basically amongst our precincts, make sure everyone gets in their correct precincts and start, developing ballots that are going to reflect the new precincts. And so it's a task. We rely very heavily on GIS at the county level. Most boards don't have their own GIS department. So we work hand in hand with them. I think one thing this year that we should probably emphasize, because I think we're collaborating so much better, Jen, is voter education. And I think that this year around in particular, there should be a huge emphasis on educating voters about their new districts and how those stack up. So we look forward to working with you on that.
I look forward to working with you on that. So one question I have is, does every voter get they get their regular postcard reminding them of their polling location and all that, right? That would tell them their new districts too? Or is there something that you all do in that regard? And we will have you back definitely to talk about ways we can work together on this piece specifically.
Our voters are very unsure of district boundary lines, and I think, just kind of gotten them educated from the last reapportionment in 2012 when we did that, and now we're going to have some changes. So what we'll do is we'll send a postcard, I think, to every voter to let them know what districts they're going to be in, because that's going to be a much more effective method than trying to get it out there in the news and on social media, because a lot of people still are not seeing it that way. But I know what we're going to be doing is, when I saw the map, we've got a precinct that's going to be divided north to south through the precinct. So I know what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks is getting those houses in our voter registration system, make sure that they're in the right congressional district. And then we're going to have to notify those people, because they're not going to understand that all of a sudden this precinct that was never split before is now going to be different congressional.
Well, and that might not stand. So let's watch and let's see what happens there, Miss Lisa. But thank you so much for at least helping us have an understanding of, there's so many players and stakeholders in redistricting or in any aspect of elections. So I know that I am personally still burnt out from 2020 as well. So I know you guys are. I know Lisa's getting ready to have do some traveling or have some vacation time, at least some time off, well deserved. Let's keep the conversations going. I think here at League, we know that we won't always agree on everything, but we think that voters benefit when our two groups talk a lot. So we will continue to do that. And with that, I just want to hand it back over to Ms. Cynthia. But first, thank you both, Aaron and Lisa. And we tell Brian we will have him back, specifically Brian back for something.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jen, and thank you, Lisa and Aaron, for joining us today. We did want to provide some information. If you want to learn more about the Ohio Association of Election Officials, you can go ahead and click on that link you see there on your screen. And a final reminder that our next Lunching with the League will feature Kyle Kondik, who is the managing editor for the Sabato's Crystal Ball, and he is out of the University of Virginia Center for Politics, and that is December 6th at noon. And we do ask for your support in all of our efforts, whether it's gerrymandering, voter rights, or any of our public policy issues, which can center around education, the environment, criminal justice, human trafficking. Please do think about giving to the League, especially as we do wrap up 2021 and look at those primaries and midterms in 2022. Obviously, there's a lot of capacity building that needs to be done there. And the Youth in Action for our 13 to 25-year-olds. If you've got some young people in your life that would like to get engaged, whether it's about democracy issues or those public policy issues, please direct them to the League of Ohio Youth in Action group. And a final reminder and a call to join the League. We do have 3 different levels of membership: primary, individual, household, and student membership. And if you are a League, please remember to pay those dues. All of those funds do go to support our overall mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. We do want to thank everyone for joining us, and we will see you back here in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.